So check out these views. They are life-changing, literally. But what does it take to get to these views? Is risking your life worth it, and what really is at risk? One of the questions I get most, almost daily, but definitely multiple times per week is Mexico safe? Specifically, is it safe to go to Cancun and Playa del Carmen as a tourist? How dangerous is it in those areas? And it's interesting to me because I don't get this question nearly as much, not even close, for like Dominican Republic, Punta Cana, but statistically and in actuality, it is a much more dangerous place than the tourist areas of Mexico, specifically Cancun and Playa del Carmen. The odds of something happening outside your hotel at Dominican Republic, Punta Cana is much greater than Cancun, but for some reason I don't get those questions as much. And today I'm going to explain why, and most importantly, I'm going to talk about the danger level, how dangerous it is to go to Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Cozumel, the Riviera Maya area in general. Before I go any further, I have to emphasize two things. In some areas in this video, I might be a little vague. It's on purpose. I do not want to get on the wrong side of the algorithm or on the wrong side of any influential powers that be. So I might be a little vague in some areas. You're gonna have to read between the lines and connect some dots. Also, I gotta emphasize that life is precious no matter who you are, where you are, what you are, okay? American, Jamaican, Mexican, life should be cherished, it should be cultivated, it should be protected. I'm talking about Americans today, mostly because I'm American. The largest contingency of tourists in Cancun, Playa are American, and the statistics for Americans are the easiest, most accessible, and most accurate. So that's what I'm gonna talk about, but again, all life is precious. So in the most simplest terms, there are people that benefit from the tourism industry in Mexico, and there are people who benefit from its decline. Obviously, the businesses, the hotels benefit from a sharp incline, an increase in tourism. The people who own the land that these hotels lease from benefit. They can charge higher rates. And of course, the politicians benefit because they can tout their country as an amazing place to visit. Who benefits from a decline in Mexican tourism? I would say businesses who are competitive to those hotels. Maybe some politicians who don't want to see Mexico do so well. And then also maybe some shadowy organizations that kind of do their own thing and have their own specific agendas that I won't even get into. Much like there was in Baghdad or in Kabul during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, there are safe zones, green zones in these major Mexico tourist cities. And not only is violence basically extremely rare, it is untolerated. It is not tolerated by anybody. It's not tolerated by the political class, it's not tolerated by the people, and it's not tolerated by the businesses or people behind the scenes. All of those people are working in concert and in harmony to ensure that nothing happens to tourists there, because any headline about something offensive or egregious happening to a tourist is bad for business. There is certainly an agreement that in these major tourist zones, such as like Playa del Carmen's Fifth Ave or Cancun's Hotel Zone, the Marina in Cabo, they are off limits in terms of violence and crime. Now, of course, the further you move away from these zones, the more something can happen. And that is where you see most of these headlines. But you have to be very, very careful when you read the headlines because they are extremely inaccurate on purpose. Let me go through a couple here with you. Now, again, I really don't enjoy going into the semantics of this, but the semantics is where all the details are. Not all deaths are equal. And again, life is precious. It is fragile. Whenever someone loses theirs, it's a tragedy. But there's a difference between a plastic surgery gone wrong, a diving accident, and then someone gunned down. And there's a difference between someone gunned down in cartel violence and then a tourist being randomly shot. So here's an article with a very, very startling headline. More Americans are killed in Mexico every year than you realize. Wow, I better pay attention to this one before I go on my trip. It goes on to talk about how there is a stern do not travel warning to certain areas of Mexico. Okay, let's dive into this. Okay, do not travel warnings for Sinaloa and Matamoros. Okay, no problem. I am never going to Sinaloa and I'm never going to Matamoros. It goes on to give a very rogue example of 4 people traveling by car, which never do that, never drive in Mexico, never leave the tourist zones. You're not safe there. But they were traveling by car for a plastic surgery expedition where 2 were unfortunately killed and then 2 were kidnapped and returned. But you're not safe outside those green zones, just like you're not safe outside the Las Vegas Strip. You're not even safe on the Las Vegas Strip. Then it starts to talk about the homicide rate. It says, well, in Mexico, it's 28 per 100K. But in the United States, it's only 7 per 100K. But that's the overall national homicide rate. That includes cartel on cartel violence. That includes inner city violence. That's not Americans going to Fred's for a lobster roll. That's not Americans going over to Isla Mujeres for the day. This is like every single tragic thing that happens in Mexico that's reported in that statistic. So that's not really a fair depiction. The article then goes on to talk about how many Americans died in Mexico per year. In 2022, there were approximately 230, and in 2021, there were approximately 203. It also goes on to further state a large portion, or the largest portion of those, were homicides, but it doesn't say where those were. It certainly doesn't say who those people were. Were they working for the cartel? Were they living in inner cities? What were they doing? And this article very sneakily and slyly omits the fact that in 2022, more Americans died in Mexico via car crash than they did by homicide. So of the 26 million Americans that go to Mexico every year, 200 very sadly die. A third of those are approximately homicides, but we don't know where they were, who they were, or the situations behind those deaths. And then another one pops up again, American deaths in Cancun. A New York detective says 8 bodies found. It's the most dangerous time to ever go to Mexico, but it doesn't talk about any Americans or tourists being hurt. And it actually just mentions that previous kidnapping where 4 people were driving from North Carolina with North Carolina plates in a white minivan, leaving Brownsville going for a tummy tuck. That's that story I recently talked about, but I've been to Brownsville. I've been to El Paso. I've been to that area. I didn't feel safe in America. But why would you cross the border and drive into Mexico? I just don't understand it. When you do that, you take a risk. And it's not a risk I'd be willing to take at all. But even as crazy as that risk is, of the 26 million Americans that go to Mexico each year, 70 unfortunately die of violence. Those numbers are much lower than what you find in any major American city. So the videos you're seeing are me walking around Cozumel, Playa del Carmen, Cancun, just without even a whim. Just walking outside my hotel while I'm going to a barber, walking to a Ryu party. In the Cancun one, I walked 2 miles to the outskirts of town. Playa del Carmen, I walked all the way from one end of town to the other, from the hotels to Fifth Ave, back and forth. 3 a.m., 11 a.m., 11 p.m., doesn't matter. Cancun, I walked the hotel zone any time of day or night. It is, in my opinion, one of the safest spots in North America. In the tourist zones, you're totally fine. But you're not in the tourist zones of, let's say, Chicago. I used to love the River North area. I used to love the Loop. I used to love the Michigan Ave, the Miracle Mile shops, but those areas are extremely violent these days. Those areas are exponentially more dangerous than Cancun. Here's an article, 2 teens, this is terrible, 2 teens dead in shooting downtown Chicago on the Loop. I mean, I used to go to the Loop all the time. Here's another one, River North shooting, man found shot, critically hurt inside Magnificent Mile hotel lobby. I used to walk River North at all times of day or night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. That is my favorite spot in Chicago. Bavette's, you have Maple and Ash, E=MC Squared is one of my favorite hotels there. I go on and on and on about the years I've spent in River North and how much I love that area. You can't even go there now. Here's another one. Actually, I don't even feel like reading these because it's just so sad. And I actually don't like this because I really like Chicago. And it's not just Chicago. I mean, it's an epidemic across this country, but whether it's valet attendants, Uber drivers, it's just sad. But the point is that people say Cancun isn't safe. Playa del Carmen isn't safe. And I would say, compared to what?